is the commissure. Commissure is basically a bundle of nerve fiber that cross or decussate over the midline from one half of the spinal cord to the other. Okay, so they basically commissures basically join both the halves, right and left halves of the spinal cord. If you look at the branches of spinal nerve, so after the ventral and dorsal roots are combined, they give dorsal rami and ventral rami. So dorsal rami innervates deep muscles of the trunk, okay, which are responsible for movement of vertebral column and skin near the midline of the back. And the ventral rami in thoracic region, they give rise to intercostal nerves, which innervate the intercostal muscles and skin over the thorax. The remaining ventral rami form 5 plexuses, including cervical plexus, brachial plexus for the upper limbs, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal plexuses. Also, there are communicating rami. If you look at the nerves, there are small nerves which are connections between spinal nerves and sympathetic chain ganglia. If you look at the gray matter, it consists of nerve cell bodies and their processes, neuroglia, their supporting cells, and blood vessels. The nerve cells which are present in gray matter, they are multipolar and they have got 3 main categories. Either they can be sensory neurons, lower motor neurons, and the interneurons. Okay, so sensory neurons are basically present in the dorsal horns. Okay, and they receive impulses from periphery of the body from different stimuli, and whose axons constitute the ascending fascicula of the white matter. So the cell bodies are present in the gray matter and the axons are present in the white matter. And they are basically located in the dorsal horns. There are also lower motor neurons. They transmit impulses to the skeletal muscles and they are located in the ventral horns. So ventral horns will be motor functions, and the dorsal horns have got sensory functions. And there are interneurons also. They link sensory and motor neurons at the same or different level, and they are basically forming spinal reflex arcs. So again, there are dorsal horn, ventral horn, and lateral horn. So dorsal horn they have got multiple nuclei, that is substantia gelatinosa, nucleus proprius, nucleus dorsalis, and visual afferent nuclei. They have specific functions. Okay, so they carry different sensations from the body, and they process in the gray horn. We will not be discussing these in detail because it's quite a rough topic. So I think I'll be skipping this slide. Coming towards the white matter consists of mixture of nerve fibers, neuroglia, and blood vessels. And white matter, as we discussed, is due to high proportion of myelinated nerve fibers and the myelinated lipids basically. The white matter is arranged in columns or funiculi, and it has got anterior, posterior, and lateral funiculus. The nerve fibers are arranged as bundles running vertically through the cord. And if you look at the definition of the tract, so it is a group of axons that share a common origin, termination, and function. If you look at the tracts, they are often named according to their points of origin and destination, just like a spinothalamic tract, whose function is to carry the pain fibers from the spine to the thalamic nuclei. And the corticospinal tract, which is basically a motor tract which carries impulses from the cortex and supplies the muscles. So depending on their function, the spinal tracts are divided into ascending and descending tracts. If you look at the divisions in white matter, the white matter is divided by posterior lateral sulcus and anterior lateral sulcus into anterior white column or funiculus, lateral white column or funicula, and the posterior white column. If you look at the regional differences of spinal cord, that is from cervical to the sacral segments, the general pattern of gray matter is the same throughout the spinal cord, but there are regional differences which are apparent on transverse sections. Okay, if you look at the amount of white matter, it increases in caudal to cranial direction. Okay, so sacral segment has got lower amount of white matter, and the cervical segment has got higher amount of white matter. It's because the fibers are added to the ascending tracts and the descending tracts leave the white matter. The gray matter is increase in volume in cervical lumbosacral enlargements because of innervation of upper and lower limbs. The lateral horn is characteristic of thoracic and upper leg lumbar segments. If you look at the tracts again, it's a collection of nerve fibers as we discussed with same origin, course, and termination. There can be ascending tracts or descending tracts. If you look at the ascending tracts, so there can be posterior column tracts like dorsal white column. There are fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, and there are lateral and anterior spinothalamic tracts. Okay, the posterior area is concerned with the position sense mainly and vibration, and lateral and anterior spinothalamic tract they are concerned with the pain and temperature pathways. If you look at the descending tracts, there are lateral and anterior corticospinal tracts which are of importance, and there are other extrapyramidal tracts which we'll be discussing. So ascending tracts include lateral and anterior spinothalamic tract. They are concerned with pain and temperature sensations, and the anterior one is concerned with the crude touch, pressure, and itch sensations. The dorsal column sensations are concerned with the vibration sense and the position sense. Okay, and there are others like anterior spinocerebellar tract and posterior spinocerebellar tract. They are again concerned with the proprioception. So why we are discussing all these ascending tracts? So by looking at the position of these ascending tracts, if there is any pathology in the spinal cord, for suppose the dorsal columns lie in the posterior column, so if there is any pathology involving the posterior columns, so the patient will have loss of vibration and the position sense. Okay, and if there any patient is having involvement of lateral or anterior spinothalamic tract, so the pain and thermal sensation will be lost in that distribution. So ascending tracts gets impulses from the pain, thermal, tactile, muscle and joint receptors to the brain. Some of the information goes to cerebral cortex, another goes up to the cerebellum. Okay. If you look at the ascending pathways, so they have got three chains. There are first order neurons, second order neurons, and third order neurons. Basically, the first order neuron includes the dorsal root, which has got cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. They do not decussate here. Okay, they do not cross the one side from one side to the other. The second order neurons, their cell bodies lie in the spinal gray matter or medulla oblongata, and they decussate there. Okay, so depending on whether they decussate or not, the manifestations vary. And the third order neurons, they are present in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. If you look at the dorsal columns or tracts, which are nucleus gracilis and cuneatus, so the C comes first in the alphabet. So the cuneatus gets supply from the impulses from the upper limb, and gracilis, because it comes later, it gets supply from the impulses from the lower limb. The main function is proprioception, okay, and fine touch sensations like tactile discrimination and stereognosis. And these senses reach conscious level. What is important? Important is because they do not cross at the entry point in the spinal cord segments. The fibers from lower limb are placed more medially than the central canal, and the fibers from the upper limb are placed more laterally. Okay, so medial to lateral. If you look at the structure, medial to lateral, from medial to lateral at cervical level, there are sacral segments. Okay, medially, then lumbar, then thoracic, and then cervical segments. From medial to lateral. So if there is any disease in the posterior column involving the central component, it will involve the lower limbs only. Okay, and if it is involving laterally, so it will involve the upper limbs. If you look at the dorsal column, again we discussed there are receptors that are Meissner corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles. They come to the posterior root ganglion. Ultimately, they end in ipsilateral, fasciculus, gracilis, and cuneatus. So the importance is that if there is involvement of posterior column, if there is any disease like posterior cord syndrome in the posterior column, so there will be ipsilateral loss of position and vibration sense. So that is the main point of discussing all these tracts. So it identifies whether the right side is involved or left side is involved. Again, the clinical application of these tracts is that there is loss of muscle, joint sense, position sense, vibration sense, and tactile discrimination on the same side level of the lesion. Okay. There's a condition that is called tabes dorsalis, which is a late manifestation of syphilis. It mainly affects lumbosacral, dorsal spinal roots, and dorsal columns. Okay, and it leads to loss of proprioception, leading to high stepping and ST gait. Okay, so if there is involvement of posterior columns, there is loss of position and vibration sense below the level of lesion on the same side of the involvement. Another condition is multiple sclerosis, which again affects mainly fasciculus cuneatus of the cervical spine. So it mainly affects the upper limbs because the cuneatus is involved and it leads to loss of proprioception in hands and fingers. Spinothalamic is the tract which is concerned with pain and temperature sensations, and crude, non-discriminative or crude touch and pressure. The fibers of both the spinothalamic tracts are intermingled to some extent. If you look at the location of the spinothalamic tracts, so this is the lateral spinothalamic tract and this one is the anterior spinothalamic tract. The important thing is that these spinothalamic tracts, they decussate. Okay, so if there is involvement of right side of the spinal cord, so the manifestations will go to the left side because the fibers ultimately cross. This is another anterior spinothalamic tract, so ultimate the route is the same, so we will not be discussing this. If you look at the clinical application of the lateral spinothalamic tract, so if there is any injury to the lateral spinothalamic tract, there will be loss of pain and thermal sensation on the contralateral side of the body, okay, below the level of lesion. Why? Because they are decussating. They cross the midline and they go to the other side. And patient will not be able to respond to pinprick and recognize heat, hot or cold temperatures. Coming to the syringomyelia, it's a condition in which the spinothalamic tract is selectively damaged because it decussates in front of the central canals. So if you look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, it has got central canals. So what is syringomyelia? It's basically enlargement of the central canal. And because the spinothalamic tract crosses in front of the central canal, so ultimately there is pressure on the spinothalamic tract leading to these findings. Okay. There is selective loss of pain and temperature in upper limbs, and which gives like shawl distribution of the loss of pain and temperature sensation. And light, touch, and proprioception are retained because the posterior columns are intact. Okay, so because central canal is enlarged and it is causing pressure on the spinothalamic tract, so there is no involvement of lateral and posterior side. Ultimately, if there is a lot of enlargement of central canal, so there is local destruction of anterior horn cells at the level side of the syrinx, which leads to lower motor neuron type of weakness in the involved segments. And this symptom is characterized by wasting, weakness, and diminished reflexes. Coming to the descending tracts, they are segregated bundles of nerve fibers in wide matter of spinal cord. They descend from supraspinal spinal centers that are referred as upper motor neurons. They've got somatic and visceral motor activities, and depending on the cells of origin, they are divided into pyramidal tracts and extrapyramidal tracts. So pyramidal tracts will be originating from cerebral cortex, and the extrapyramidal tracts will be originating from brainstem. What they do is they regulate basically lower motor neuron activity, and they control movement, muscle tone, spinal reflexes, spinal autonomic functions, and modulation of sensory transmission to the higher centers. If you look at the different descending tracts, the main descending tracts include corticospinal tracts. They are divided into lateral and anterior corticospinal tracts, and the corticobulbar tracts. Okay, and other ones they are the extrapyramidal sort of tracts. The important descending tract is corticospinal tract, which controls voluntary, discrete, skilled movements, especially of distal parts of the limbs. They arise from cell bodies in the cerebral cortex, that is from precentral gyrus, which is a motor gyrus, and the postcentral gyrus is the sensory one. Okay, so if you look at the, they originate from the primary motor cortex. They pass through the corona radiata and ultimately form the pyramids of medulla, and they terminate 98% on the contralateral alpha and gamma motor neurons and gray matter or interneurons. If you look at the decussation, about 70 to 90% of fibers decussate and enter the contralateral lateral spinothalamic tract, which is located in the lateral part of the spinal white matter. And 10 to 25% of pyramidal fibers remain ipsilateral, and they enter anterior corticospinal tract, which is located lateral to the ventral median fissure. If you look at the extrapyramidal tracts, they originate in the brainstem, carrying motor fibers to the spinal cord, and they are responsible for involuntary and autonomic control of all the musculatures, just like muscle tone, balance, posture, and locomotion. There are mainly 4 tracts in total: vestibulospinal and reticulospinal. They do not decussate, and they provide ipsilateral innervation, while the rubrospinal and tectospinal tracts, they do decussate and provide contralateral innervation. Again, this is detailed description of all these tracts. So if there is injury to the descending tracts, what you will get? You will get upper motor neuron lesions. Okay, so there are lesion of corticospinal tracts, there is pyramidal tracts, and there are lesions of extrapyramidal tracts. If there is lesion of corticospinal tracts, there will be upper motor neuron signs, that is Babinski's sign will be present. If you touch the lateral edge of the foot, so there is a positive Babinski reflex. Okay, superficial abdominal reflexes are absent, and cremasteric reflex is also absent. There is loss of performance of fine scaled voluntary movement, especially at the distal end of the limb. And if there is lesions of the extrapyramidal tract, so there is spastic paralysis. Okay, there are exaggerated deep muscle reflexes in some flexors, and there is rigidity, which is Cleft-Snipe reaction. Again, you can have lower motor neuron lesions. They can be because of any lesion, just like poliomyelitis. They destroy the neurons in anterior column or its axons in the anterior root of spinal nerve. And the clinical signs include flexor paralysis, muscle atrophy, and loss of muscle reflexes. There can be muscle fasciculations, and ultimately there will be muscle contracture and degeneration. Coming to the syndromes, there's spinal shock syndrome, which follows a spinal cord injury, and there will be short-term loss of all the neurological activity below the level of injury. So there is loss of motor, sensory reflexes, and autonomic function. It's basically due to temporary physiological disorganization of a spinal cord function. It can last 30 to 60 minutes or up to 6 weeks. So as long as the spinal shock ends, the prognosis varies. So if the duration of spinal shock is lesser, the prognosis is good. If the duration of spinal shock is more, then the prognosis is bad. In complete cord transection, which can be caused by fracture dislocation of the vertebral column, the clinical features will be bilateral low motor neuron paralysis, bilateral spastic paralysis below the level of lesion. There will be bilateral loss of all the sensation below the level of lesion because all the tracts are cut at the level of the spinal cord transection. Bladder and bowel function are no longer under voluntary control. So these are different incomplete spinal cord syndromes, which include central cord syndrome, Brown-Séquard syndrome, anterior cord, and the posterior cord syndrome. So if you want to understand these incomplete spinal cord syndromes, you have to remember where the tracts are present. Okay, so in central cord, because as we discussed, the spinothalamic tract crosses anterior to the central canal, so there will be involvement of a spinothalamic tract there. In anterior cord, because there are corticospinal tracts, so there will be involvement of those tracts. In posterior cord, because there is involvement of fasciculus, cuneatus, and gracilis, so they are concerned with the position and vibration sense. So there will be loss of those sensations. If you look at the central cord syndrome in detail, it's the most common incomplete spinal cord syndrome. It's common in elderly with minor extension injuries. This happens in those who have got already degenerative spine and this osteophyte complex is already present. So they've got minor extension injury, often because of forward fall with facial impact. That leads to because anterior osteophytes and posterior enfolded phyllemum is present and that compresses the cord. If you look at the causes of the central cord, which include trauma, syringomyelia, as we discussed, or spinal cord tumors. The characteristic point of central cord syndrome is that the upper limb involvement is more than the lower limbs, okay, and hands are involved more than the arms due to central location of the cervical fibers, as we discussed. In this, the bowel and bladder are early involved, okay, and if the patient presents late, so the upper extremity has got lower motor neuron signs, that is, they become clumsy, and the lower extremity has got upper motor neuron signs, so they become spastic. The main problem with central cord system is sensory problems, which include pain and temperature because the spinothalamic tract crosses just anterior to the central canal, and especially in the shawl distribution, as we discussed previously. The treatment for central cord syndrome is controversial. It can be non-operative or operative. It's extremely controversial. If you look at the prognosis of central cord, it's good, but the full recovery is rare. If you look at the follow-ups, these patients are usually ambulatory and final follow-ups. Usually they gain bladder control earlier, followed by upper extremity and hand recovery, which is unpredictable, and patient often present with clumsy hands. Okay, so if you look at the recovery pattern in the central cord system, the lower extremities recover first, bowel and bladder functions are recovered next, the proximal upper extremity is recovered later, and the hand function is the last to recover. So they present with clumsy hands, but the prognosis is better than the anterior cord syndrome. If you look at the anterior cord syndrome, it's second most common incomplete spinal cord injury. It's most common after vertebral compression, so anteriorly the cord is compressed. which is by flexion and compression mechanism. There can be compression or occlusion of anterior spinal artery. There can be direct anterior cord compression due to any tumors, or there can be aortic dissection which leads to compression of the anterior spinal artery and ultimately damage to the cord. In this, the lower extremities are involved more than the upper extremity, while in central cord, the upper extremities are involved more than the lower extremities. There is bilateral loss of pain, temperature, and light touch because of involvement of anterior and lateral spinothalamic tract, as we discussed previously. There is motor dysfunction because the corticospinal tracts are involved. Okay, but the main point is there's the preserved dorsal column sensation. So the position and vibration sense will be intact because there is no involvement of posterior columns. It has got worse prognosis, and the only chances of recovery are 10 to 20%. Mostly during the surgery, we want intraoperative hypotension during complex surgical procedures. So that is also one of the risk factors for anterior cord syndrome. If you look at the Brown-Séquard syndrome, it's a complete cord hemitransection, usually after penetrating trauma. So one side of the cord is damaged. Sorry. So there is ipsilateral motor dysfunction with lower motor neuron weakness at the level and upper motor neuron signs below the injury. So there is ipsilateral proprioception and vibration loss because of involvement of posterior columns and because they do not decussate. So there is ipsilateral loss. Because the spinothalamic tracts are involved, so there is contralateral pain and temperature loss. Okay. There are no bladder problems as it is not bilateral. So one of the half of the spinal cord will be supplying the bladder. It has got excellent prognosis and 99% ambulatory final follow-up. If we look at the posterior cord, it's a syndrome. It's very rare. Okay, it has got preserved motor, pain, and light touch because all these tracts are intact. The anterior and lateral spinothalamic tract are intact, and the corticospinal tracts are intact. So there is only involvement of the fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus. So only the dorsal columns will be affected. Two other syndromes which are present will include conus medullaris syndrome and Kodai-Kana syndrome. The conus medullaris is when the compression is at the level of L1 and L2, which is sudden and bilateral. Patients present with more low back pain. The motor strength, if you look at the involvement of muscles, it's symmetrical. Mainly the ankle jerks are affected. Okay, and early sphincter involvement is characteristic of the conus medullaris syndrome. Okay, and there is frequent impotence. If you look at the Kodai-Kana syndrome, it involves the Kodai-Kana level, which is the L2 and below, which is involvement of lumbosacral nerve roots. The presentation is gradual and unilateral. Okay, if you look at the radicular pain, which is more severe because the disc or anything will be compressing the nerve, specific nerve. The motor strength is more marked, asymmetric, and there is areflexia. Okay, and the reflexes, both the knee jerks and ankle jerks are affected, and there is localized numbness at the saddle area. Sphincter dysfunction tend to present late in Kodai-Kana syndrome. Okay, and the impotence is less frequent. So this is again a summary of all the incomplete cord syndromes. Anterior cord syndrome, when there is involvement of anterior spinal cord, central cord, so there will be involvement of spinothalamic tract and ultimately the corticospinal tracts and anterior horn syndrome. The Brown-Séquard, which is hemisection. Okay, so ipsilateral loss of motor, vibration, and proprioception, and contralateral loss of pain and temperature.